Welcome to Sky Team's People First with Morag Barrett.
Welcome to this week's episode of People First, and I am excited to welcome back to the podcast my friend and colleague, Heather Younger. Heather, as you will recall, because I know you're all avid listeners and watchers of the podcast, is the CEO of a leadership and executive development firm, Employee Fanatics, here in Colorado. She is also, though, a prolific writer. The Art of Caring Leadership is here. I would show you The Art of Active Listening, but that's in digital format on my Kindle. And we are going to be talking today about her new book, The Art of Self-Leadership. There is a theme in the nomenclature there, Heather, that I will be asking you about. However, Heather is an award-winning leader in the area of employee engagement, recognized by Inspiring Workplaces, and is a LinkedIn Learning course partner and 3 times best-selling author and TEDx speaker. She has bells and whistles galore, and I am so excited for this conversation. Heather, welcome back to People First.
Thank you so much for having me. You are amazing. What a gem.
It's going to be fun. But so much has happened. I mean, good grief. Not only are we about to talk about your fourth book, but you've got another one in the works coming behind that. They're like buses. Wait a minute, and 4 are going to come along at once. So what is this passion about writing?
I think a big part of it, when I think about like even just going to the very first book, the first book was kind of born out of, I was just going through a layoff at that time, and I was trying to find my voice because I felt a little voiceless in that process, and I wanted to, I could see by just writing on LinkedIn and things like that that people were intrigued by how I talked about leadership, and I just thought, well, I should maybe I'll just write this first thing, and it was just kind of kind of a higher end calling card, and then all the other ones after that, like the Art of Caring Leadership that came after that a few years later. Actually, to be honest, it was more than a few years later. It was like 5 or 6 years, something like that. 4 years later.
Nobody's counting.
That one came out of the podcast. My podcast is called Leadership with Heart. And it came out of that podcast because I was getting maybe to episode 25. Now I've done like 350 episodes. And I got to that episode and I remember thinking to myself, holy smokes, these people that I'm talking to it's like mind blowing how much I am learning in this. And then I started to think, wait a second, not everybody listens to podcasts. How can other people learn from this too? And so that's where I just decided to start create that Art of Caring Leadership, where inside of it, there's like 80 other people's voices that I just peeled away to kind of come up with the 9 behaviors of caring leadership. So, and then, like I said, after that, I think the issue is more about how do I continue to, I call it evangelize, really, all the messages that I think are so important in this world, and do it in multiple ways where not everybody hears me on a stage. Not everybody will listen to podcasts. Okay, a book. It's just all these different mediums for people to be able to access the content.
Okay, well, I am excited for this, and I had the opportunity to dive into an early galley copy. See, that's when you have friends in highfalutin places. You get advanced copies of books, and I loved every moment with The Art of Self-Leadership. But it starts in the introduction with you talking about unveiling your golden core, not a golden fleece, a golden core. So tell us more about the golden core that we all need to unveil.
Well, one of the things I'm not going to do, because I think that story, I cannot wait for you to actually read exactly how I came about it, because that to me is the most, it is so interesting. And it makes you realize that nothing is an accident and that there is just kind of like this plan in front of us. Right. So, but I would say this. Oftentimes, what I have found as I speak to audience, thousands of people, every year, I will ask people in the audience, well, what is it that makes you like, what's the biggest barrier for you showing up as the leader I described? What are the things that are getting in your way of showing up as a caring leader, as a leader who listens, as one who makes people feel this particular way? And often what I found, which I found just so interesting, is many people not really owning their role in how they show up. They would say things like, oh, my manager, this, our leadership team, this, our budget, this. And I thought, well, okay, so my message has evolved over time because I kept hearing those messages to say, wait a second, we all have a choice in the seat that we sit in and the place that we stand and the body that we hold, right? To show up in the way that we know serves us best first and then other people second. And why are we continuing to give away our power? And why are we covering up our brilliance? And so, this inner core idea is saying, pull back the curtain, rip off the thing that's covering the thing that's in you that's great, whether you know it or not. And we get about that in the book too, to show other people, to show the brilliance. So, when you work on your internal shine, then the external shine comes through. And now you have more influence and things like that at work and even your personal life.
It's interesting that you talk about that, because what appeals to about the content in The Art of Self-Leadership is it applies to anyone, irrespective of your title or where you are in your career, because we are all leaders. To your point, we're showing up to be the best we can be, but are we actually sharing what that means for us? And listening to you there just made me think about the coaching call I had this morning with a leader in Ireland. And we were talking about how do you live your values and understanding what is it that makes you special and how do you step into that truth versus, oh, well, the corporate values say, or this is the role models that I've had, and it being a juxtaposition. So how do we go about that first step? In the first part of your book, you talk about self-understanding. Give us a couple of nuggets as to what can folks listening to this conversation do to understand their self-leadership.
I think the very first thing with self-understanding is, I feel like I have this book. You could look at it as self-help. You could look at it personal and professional development kind of thing. You could look at it leadership development. It's all of those things. And embedded in that often happens in our culture is that this message of that we're not good enough. And what I try to kind of hit on right in the beginning of the book is that we are good just because we are. We are good enough because we are, and that is it. In fact, we can be just exactly who we are every day, don't have to do one more thing, and we're still good, and we're still good enough. And that understanding our intrinsic worth is such a huge part of that. Because again, our culture is like, fix you, fix you, fix you, fix you. And what I'm trying to do is saying, like, not fix you because you're good enough in and of yourself, but boy, how much more brilliant could you shine to those externally to you if you could just polish a little bit more, if you could just
Mhm.
peel back a little bit more. So I think that's kind of the first thing I like to talk about is to be thinking about what is that worth that you have. What are the things, the barriers that are getting in your way of understanding how worthy you are as a human on planet, irrespective of any title you could hold, anything that you could have as far as something that's physical. um, you just are that good. And once we gather that understanding, and I do like in there, I do some exercises about, what are the things I value? How do I represent those values? How do I feel in the current environment in my own skin? And there are issues like, imposter syndrome in there. And what are my strengths and what are my limitations? It's really about digging deep into what is inside of you that makes you unique, that makes you a gift to the world, because we all are gifts to the world. And how do we now elevate that? So polish it up, which is that kind of next step in that book. And then how do we show that after we're polishing it? How does that then show itself to the external world? And how does that help us with our relationships in and outside of work? But we do have more control. I think what I want people to understand is they have more power than they think to be the people they want to be in the roles they want to be, to show up before others for the way that they want, and even just understand who they are as humans.
I love that because it's coming from a foundation of strength. I agree and applaud that whole point that we all bring something to the table, and yet it is the self-dimming of our light that holds us back. And I know even after 18 years of leading Sky Team, a successful business by any measure, that moment of self-doubt and trash talk still will climb into my head and at 2 a.m. cause me to lie awake. And you have a chapter on understanding fear. So I'm curious, as an 18-year-old entrepreneur, my business is now old enough to drink alongside me. I know my fears are triggered when I feel like I'm letting other people down, yet my bar and threshold for good and good enough is still head and shoulders above many others. It is the fear of being found wanting, and that can cause
Mm.
me to hesitate. I'm curious, what are your fears, Heather? that can occasionally either slow you down or dim your light a little bit until you catch yourself and change the narrative?
I think one of the things I do talk about in the book is imposter syndrome, and I think that element is one element that I could be standing on a stage, and usually when I'm on it, and I'm on it for like after about the first 5 minutes, that goes away. But before I get there, and sometimes when I first step on there, depending on who's in the audience, who am I talking to, occasionally I'll have a little bit of that, and then I do smack myself, or like for example, I'm part of an agency that has some very like well-known names in it, and for that first year of that, I felt like, what am I doing here? Like, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. So that idea of like worthiness is something that it rears its head, and that idea of like, do I belong here? I'm not sure I'm really as good as these people. It rears its head, and I just politely slap myself and say, I go back to, Heather, you are good just because you are, and you bring unique value based upon your lived experience that not one other human can bring. And once I come to that realization that I am that person, that I can bring that value, I kind of loosen up and I relax into my skin, and I say, okay, I'm here for these people. They need something from me. They selected me to be in front of these thousands of people, whatever it is, right? Hundreds of people, 20 people, 100
Mm-hmm.
people. They selected me because they saw the message and they wanted the thing they saw, and it is good enough, and you are great. And those kinds of realities I had to do. And it's just a constant thing. I'm 53 years old, and I'm telling you, I've been doing that my entire life, and I don't think it's ever going to go away, but it is showing up less and less. And my self-worth has absolutely increased. My self-confidence in those environments increases with proper preparation. Things like that have really helped a lot.
I love the synergies, both in terms of our life journeys, but also the
Mm.
philosophy. And I'm reminded of a conversation I had with one of my sons, and he was at university at the time or just headed off. And he was saying to me, I hope I don't mess it up. And I remember saying, mess what up? And he said, life. And I
Mm.
had that, like, heartbreak moment as a mother of, like, son, you can't mess it up. It's you just iterate. Every day is a role play. We're all making it up. And the irony was, I remember leaving that conversation where his imposter syndrome, his moment of, am I choosing the right course and career
Mhm.
path? And I was heading to fly to meet my colleague, Dr. Linda Sharkey, to co-author The Future Proof Workplace, my second book. And I remember sitting at DIA going, I'm meeting Dr. Linda Sharkey. She's got a PhD. She worked with Jack Welch at GE. I mean, she's like a big deal. Like, how can I do it? And I remember in my doom scrolling, like one does, and this meme came up that said, don't believe everything that you think. And here's the punchline by Morag Barrett, because it was one of the social media things. And so the universe was giving me the slap. Well, anyway, I go and spend the day with Linda. We outline the future proof workplace. It was a best-selling book. It still is very relevant today.
Mm.
And at the end of that day, there's Linda, who's 20 years further ahead in her career than me, going, do you think it will be a good book? Do you think we can do this? And so within that week, I had Matthew starting out on his life and career, me mid-career, Linda later career, all with those moments of, are we enough? And
Uh,
so to your point, I think it doesn't actually go away, but I think the time between that first niggly thought and being able to go, oh, for heaven's sake, of course you've got this, gets shorter. And we have more of a sense of humor around, yeah, okay, you know, can I do more? Can I polish myself? Yes. Am I going to choose to do it? That's the choice we all get to make every day.
it's so true. I was listening to audiobook as I was working out at the gym today, both two really big, behaviors for self leadership. But I'm in there, and I think it's called The Slight Edge. That I think that's the name of the book, and I love it because it's a super simple concept, which is like, it's just as easy to do the thing as it is to not do the thing, and the
Mhm.
thing is like consistency, and the thing is not some like big huge like jump forward. It is literally the thing that you do every day, right? Whatever those things
Mhm.
are, you do multiple the things, or you choose not to. And so it's I think almost all the things we do in life, as we think about, like weight gain, we think about job promotions, we think about spouse, we think about children, all the things. It's like every day we either do the thing or we don't.
Yep.
And it's our choice, and we either benefit or pay the price either way. And sometimes there's a gray, and we don't feel either one, and we don't feel it immediately. It happens over time. And I think that like almost all the things we talk about boil down to that concept of, are you going to do those things that are consistent every day? That in this case, for self leadership, are you doing the things every day to help you grow as a person, as a professional, as a leader in your home and at work? And are you being intentional about the movements and the things that you need to do? And all I'm doing in this particular book is giving you a framework, a model to be thinking about what are the things to touch on as you're thinking about what should be my daily activities, or what should I be staying away from. That's really what I set out to do. Everything I do is pretty simple. It's extremely kind of
It's
organic,
pragmatic.
intuitive. Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And even your gym example there leads nice into the middle section of the book, which is all about personal growth and sustainability. And it starts with self-care. And I know to my own cost, I have focused on the busy, the hustle. That's what we're raised to believe, versus the need for me to go to the gym. And it was only 18 months ago that I started getting back into a regular gym workout. And I found that my energy
Hmm.
and my focus and my inspiration has increased along with it, as I both detach from the desk and the endless Zooms, but also have space for my brain just to make connections when I'm on that dratted treadmill. I hate the treadmill. I like the rower, hate the treadmill. Um,
Oh, you like the rower? That's impressive.
do like the rower. Yes, I can. Oh, yes, trying to get my split time down. So prioritizing self-care, this comes out of our book, You, Me, We, Why We All Need a Friend of Work and How to Show Up as One, that we need to be an ally and a friend to ourselves. So in
Mm,
what ways do you prioritize self-care for yourself?
mm. Well, here's one like super simple way for those who can see the video, but I'm holding up a water bottle, and
Mhm.
I'm hyper intentional. I mean, every day, if it's the one thing I do and I do consistently, is drinking four of these. So I have to, this is 24 ounces. I'm just drinking like, I can drink four. Sometimes I'll try to get in five, but it's a rarity unless I've had like a lot of sweating going on, then I may get to the fifth one. But the drinking of water is huge. It helps with it helps with the whole vascular system, helps with kidney function, it helps with memory and centeredness. I mean, it's so many things that it does. So like just this one thing, I do get to the gym. I try to move, 4 to 5 days a week. I call it moving because it could be anything. It could be walking. It could be something, walking around a track, walking outside, walking with my husband, walking my dog, but it could also be like lifting weights. So I think those are some things. Prayer is a part of my life, and making sure that I have those times of that. Being with my kids, believe it or not, is self-care for me. It really does fill me up. There are some times when it's too busy and then I have to kind of back away and do the thing that is filling me up at a higher level, but cuddling with them, for example, or doing like crossword puzzles or things like that, to
Mm.
me is self-care. It fills me up. I just tell people to focus on what it is that fills them up. There's emotional well-being, there's going to be therapy and things like that. There's the part that's like, financial well-being. I think it's a holistic approach. It's not just the physical, it's all the things. But whatever it is, it's the thing that says, right, it's that thing that just it lets you take the breath, feel more you, feel more human, feel more connected, and not as stressed to try to always be proving worth and always be reaching a goal and things like that. The fight doesn't have to always be there. That's what I
Yeah,
look at in
it's
self-care.
being centered and ground. And I love the phrase that you
Mhm.
use there, which is filling us up. And it's a trite meme that you can't pour from an empty cup. But I know from my own cost that when I focus outwards, because abundance and generosity is my de facto operating
Mm,
system for the world, and it's the foundation of our ally mindset and ally mindset profile. But what I've learned my cost is if I'm always saying yes and giving, but without guardrails, or prioritizing the me and what do I need, then at some point, either I or that relationship suffers. So I'm glad that that's an explicit part of the art of self leadership, and a whole chapter in the book with some great recommendations and ideas that your readers are going to be able to implement. But that relationship with self and relationship with others brings us to that third section, which is all about social interaction and influence. So, what role have relationships played in your success?
it's interesting. I think early on, probably The first 30 years or so, I didn't have like a lot of mentors. I can think of my grandmother who would, this is early on, where she'd kind of say, "You're going to be a little lawyer," and she'd push me to be a lawyer. And like she was someone who kind of like was a mentor to that extent, because no one else was really pulling me up or pushing me out to think bigger than where my current circumstances were. But I really hadn't had any formal mentorship, and I still haven't had a formal mentor. I've hired coaches where I was paying them to kind of give me advice, but the mentorship wasn't as much there. I would have to say that I'm the only child. My parents are really big impacts on my life, and so was my grandmother. And then I, been married now. I have 4 kids, and so those relationships are absolutely key. I said to before, they help me towards a self care. They peel me away from the thing that keeps me head down and sometimes hyper focused and stressed and tense, to the thing that relaxes me, that calms me, that makes me feel a sense of love and care. So I know what those things are there, and those relationships. I try to focus on them, and I try not to give them my worst, but my best. But it doesn't always happen. And then I would say in the last maybe 10 years gotten better at building relationships with females. Up until that point, I would say I didn't have great relations with females, and it would be mostly men that I'd have relationships with. And I don't know if it was because of me, and I really have no clue why that was. All I know is that now I have these more safe spaces with a handful or so of women, where I can just feel like I can be them, be myself, and that we can kind of cuddle and we can talk and we can laugh and giggle and say whatever it is we want to, and no one's right. No one's going to
Mhm.
be make us feel silly or less than. And so I'm being very intentional about it. But there's certain people that I'm called to, they're called to me, and I'm just trying to do better now at leaning into that and saying, Heather, you've gotten this far. I really did get quite far with this whole like self-reliance bootstrap idea, which is why I'm the one writing about self-leadership. It makes a lot of sense. And at the same time, when I talk about relationships, I'm saying all the time in the audiences and books that we have to have people with us on this journey, because it's just too tough to do it alone. I know it because I did it the first 30 something, 40 something years. And it's way better to do it with other people now. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's at the heart of our research, the importance of our professional relationships. And earlier you just said that you hadn't had mentors, but you've hired coaches. So I'm just curious, how do you differentiate between those two roles? What does a mentor or a coach, what does that mean for you?
I think a mentor in my mind is someone who is, willing to spend time. You're not necessarily paying them. I do know there are people who have mentorship programs that you pay for, but in my mind, a mentor is, in the traditional sense, someone who will spend time and be willing to kind of look at ways that I can get better. Maybe introduce me to people or concepts. Maybe recommend a book or a friend. Things like that.
Hmm.
They're on my side. They could be there to uplift, to advise, to give some constructive feedback. With the coach, it depends on what it is. Like I had one, much earlier on, where it really was about growing in my leadership. I had one, a business coach I hired, that was literally more about focused on the business and my
Hmm.
role in it, and how we could kind of grow revenue and things like that. So I think one thing that I've learned is I have to trust my gut, and I know in most cases where my gaps are, because I have a high level of emotional self-awareness. So because I know where the gaps are, I go to people very specifically who I know can fill that specific gap. So I'm not trying to have them solve for something that's already my strength. I'm having them solve for the thing that's my biggest gap, the thing that's just
Hmm.
gaping. And so I'm pretty proud of myself to just be aware enough to know, okay, this is really the area that's staring back at you, and who is it that or that you could find someone else who can show you, who knows how to help you fill that gap. So yeah, that's what I think. I've paid those people. So yeah, I do see coaches as mostly the people I'm paying, although there's informal coaches in life too. I really think that's kind of the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how you're only one conversation and one relationship away from realizing your dream, whatever that might be. But it goes back to the very start, which is if we don't have the courage to ask, then we may never know that we were that close to getting that next step in whatever it is that fills us up. And so relationships, they're everything, at least from my perspective.
It's so true. Well, I talk about, even like in that last section, I talk about feedback. And I think feedback has been kind of the impetus for all my growth. And I think like the person I am today is absolutely because I have a receptivity to feedback more than most people. And I mean, it's hard sometimes. I remember my very first 360 feedback report, and it was just awful. It was awful, like for everybody who
Mm.
got it from this one manager. Mine was the best of the worst, and that's not saying much. And I remember it being so painful. And I took months to kind of sift through it because my brain just couldn't handle it. And over time, I've just been that person who's able to just take it in. And I'm always asking, and I'm desensitized sometimes to it, but at the same time, I'm not trying to change every little bit because that foundational belief that I am good enough because of who I am. I am good enough just because of, right, I am who I am. Um, it helps me to know that that I can get better, but I'm looking at the trends. I'm looking at the big picture versus all the little things.
Okay. So, as we think about the impact for your new book, The Art of Self-Leadership, what are you most excited for?
What I'm hoping is that people will understand the power they have, really understand it. Because I think what happens is we give it away way too much. And so I'm hoping that people will start to, maybe folks that are struggling with, it's not necessarily, I mean, it could be issues of self-doubt and self-confidence, things like that. And oftentimes I think that is there when they are hearing or when I'm hearing the blaming, when I'm hearing the waiting. People are waiting for green lights. They're waiting for somebody to give them access. And so my goal is to say, you see now that you are your own green light. You see now that you don't need to wait for other people. And by the way, you have no one else to blame, but that it's you who has to take responsibility for the journey that you're on. And that's the exciting part, is that you don't need to be waiting anymore. Just take it by the reins and let's get to it.
Powerful words. You don't have to be waiting anymore. Just get on and do it. So, Heather, how can people who are listening and watching this episode learn more about you and your work? And more importantly, get their hands on, or their ears in, or their eyes on a copy of The Art of Self-Leadership?
I would say the best place to go for the book would be Amazon right now. We're
Okay.
doing a big push on Amazon. So, The Art of Self Leadership, Discover the Power Within You and Learn to Lead Yourself is on Amazon. So, I'd go there. To learn more about me, I'd say heatheryounger.com is probably the easiest. So, that's heatheryounger.com. That would be the easiest. And then if you're someone who's on LinkedIn, I'm there quite a bit. So, if you follow me there, you'll also see a lot of good stuff there too.
Wonderful. Well, Heather, thank you for returning to People First. I'll make sure all of that information is included in the show notes below, but wishing you all the ongoing success with this book and the next one. And I look forward to the conversation that we have when that one hits the shelves too.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being a huge gem with a huge heart. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for joining Morag today. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. If you learned something worth sharing, share it. Cultivate your relationships today when you don't need anything before you need something. Be sure to follow Sky Team and Morag on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you have any ideas about topics we should tackle, interviews we should do, or if you yourself would like to be on the show, drop us a line at info@skyteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and remember, business is personal and relationships matter. We are your allies.